Hello and welcome to this free webinar called Building a Case for a Legacy Program. I'm very excited you're interested in learning more about how to build your case so that you can start your legacy program. My name is Ligia Pena. I'm the Globetrotting Fundraiser, and this is my company. I've been fundraising for about 20 years, whereby the first 15 were part as mostly a small shop fundraiser in small and medium-sized organizations, although I did also work in some pretty big organizations as well. And the last 4 years, I was the Global Legacy Manager at Greenpeace International, where I developed the global strategy of legacy giving in 14 different markets. So I'm very excited to be able to share my knowledge and all the things I've learned over the last 20 years. I am now coach and strategist to nonprofits in fundraising in general, and but more specifically in legacies. I've helped launch fundraising programs and legacy programs in countless organizations. I even wrote the Small Shop Fundraising chapter in Excellence in Fundraising in Canada, the second volume. And I also founded the Online Legacy Bootcamp, which is an in-person online program where I help organizations launch or reboot their legacy program from scratch. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to smash a few myths because there's a lot of myths about legacy fundraising. So we're going to smash the heck out of them. Then we're going to talk very briefly about the state of legacy giving in the world. We're also then going to break down how to build a case for launching a legacy program, because as a fundraiser, you will most likely have to build a case in order to convince senior management and the board to allow you and to give you funds in order to start a legacy program. And then we're going to talk about creating the right culture for legacy success. So, what are some of the common myths surrounding legacy fundraising? So the first one is that legacy fundraising is difficult, that it is virtually, it's very difficult to attain and it takes forever, and that you need to be an absolute expert. And it's not true. In fact, I find it's not to say that it isn't challenging at the time, at times, but it isn't impossible, because the beauty of it is that it is about the relationships you build with your donors. And so if you've held any kind of relationship in the past with anyone, then you'll be able to do this. And so this is what's so beautiful about legacy fundraising. Next, the second most common myth here, and these myths are in no particular order, so let's keep that in mind. Another myth is that one needs to be an expert, such as a lawyer, an accountant, or financial planner. And nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, because, as I was saying in the first point, this is all about building relationship with your donors. The key here is to focus on the relationship building, and then the rest can just be done by the donor's legal advisor or financial planner. So you don't need to have all the answers. In fact, you shouldn't have all the answers, because you shouldn't put yourself in a position where you are giving legal, accounting, or financial advice when you really don't have that area of expertise. That's not your area of expertise. Next is that all legacies are realized decades later. I know that commonly we tend to say, oh, well, it takes from 10 to 15 years for a gift to be realized. And in some cases, yeah, it's true, it could happen. But in other cases, depending how, what's in your database, how old your donors are, it's quite possible that many of your donors could be older and at that age group where the gift might be realized a little sooner. And so we can't make that assumption that the return on the investment will happen in many years from now. Another common myth is that good marketing focuses on organizational needs. And just mind-boggling how we have to continue saying that we need to be more donor-centric. And if you want to build strong relationships with your donors, you need to be donor-centric. You can't be all about the organization's needs. So really focus on making the donor the hero, making sure that your copy is connecting the donor with the beneficiaries of your organization. So basically the cause. Next is that legacy marketing should be passive. And it's so not true. Actually, you need to continually also communicate the urgency and the importance of legacy fundraising and legacy gifts for your organization in order to deliver your mission. And so in order to do that, you cannot have passive marketing. And so it's important to communicate that as well. 6, and this is perhaps one of the two. The last two are the ones that really rattle me the most. And as you can tell, I'm very, very passionate about this. I mean, I'm so passionate about legacies that I'm even doing my PhD on this. Like, you know, this is going to be the topic of my dissertation. So I feel really strongly about this. There is, yes, it is possible that some of your wealthier donors might be better versed when it comes to gifts and wills. But what we've seen experientially, and this is actually a research I'm trying to conduct at the moment, is that most gifts and wills come in from regular donors. What I mean by that is by your regular monthly donor, or that donor that gives you $50 every year, you know, donations that appear to not be very, very out of the special or out of the ordinary. But at the end of the day, they are the donors that are the most committed and the most passionate about your cause. And so to say that, and I mean, of course, it's important to say that it doesn't mean that a major donor that gives you $50,000 or $100,000 every year is not passionate about your cause. But to say that in order to have a legacy program, you need to have a very robust major gift program, completely untrue. Actually, it's the opposite. If you have a strong monthly giving program, those are your best prospects. So we need to stop thinking that you need to have wealthy people in your database in order to have a successful legacy program. And lastly, the other myth that we need to bust, and that also gets me really rattled, is when people think that legacy giving is morbid because we're talking about death. I have never once talked about death with a legacy donor. If anything, we talk about life. We talk about the life that they lived. We talk about the values that they lived their life by and how those values are in line with the organization values, because that is what a legacy gift is. It's about shared values and the organization being able to continue delivering those values and living those values beyond the donor's life. So really it's about talking about life. So we need to stop thinking that going to see a donor to talk about a gift and a will is about, anticipating their death, because that's not where donors are. Okay. So now that we've busted, smashed those myths, why do we care? Why should we care about legacy giving? Now, I know there's a lot of numbers being given about the expected wealth transfer, and it's really, really difficult to pinpoint an exact number. The number I've seen the most has been that the wealth transfer between the baby boomers and the next generation, the Gen Xers, is valued at approximately $16 trillion US. That is a ridiculous amount of money. And so we can't leave that money on the table. If you do not engage with your donors to talk about legacy giving, you're basically leaving a portion of that money on your table. So imagine if your organization was able to get just a small, tiny percentage of that, how much more impact your organization can have with that. Okay. So let that sink in a little bit. 16 trillion US dollars. That's a lot of chunk of change. So what does it take? What do we need to do? So we need to stop spinning our wheels. Unfortunately, the nonprofit sector is terrible at long-term planning, at developing a long-term vision. So we need to start implementing that. So, a quick, for instance, imagine those organizations that perhaps struggled a lot during the 2009 a great recession. If they had foresight and were able to look at a long-term vision in order to prevent being in the same kind of situation, perhaps they would have fared better today during this current pandemic that's happening in 2020. So we need to continually support training and support the professional development of our fundraisers so that they can develop those skills in order to implement and develop legacy fundraising in the organizations. We also need to properly invest in our resources because the legacies have the highest ROI because there's a very low cost per dollar. And so knowing that that has the best return on investment, when it makes sense to invest more in that, even if some of the gifts will probably come in a few years, it'll catch up eventually. And so that it's going to do the organization quite well. We also need to be very creative and innovative, having a multi-channel approach to legacy marketing and taking risks and doing tests. This is great for just general fundraising, but for legacies, there is a lack of creativity, and we need to be a little sassier and be more tongue-in-cheek and do tests to see how people react. Society is ever changing, and so we need to change accordingly. We can only do that if we do some testing to see, what are the new things that could be working that can help us do legacy marketing differently. And we need to bring value to donors. We need to create long-term donor journeys with our donors from the moment of the first gift. We need to look at donors as each and every one of them, no matter what age, ethnic background, type of gifts they make. We need to look at them all as having the potential of leaving a gift in their will to the organization. So we need to develop donor journeys that enable that relationship to build over the years so that you can get to that legacy gift. So now, how do you build your business case? First and foremost, you need to find your internal allies. So your allies can be your director of finance. That's always been, to me, when I was doing frontline fundraising, that has always been the best ally and the first person I would go to, because obviously they're concerned about the financial stability of the organization. That is their job. And so if you can bring a solution to that, then that is the best thing. The director of finance will be very supportive of your plans to start a legacy program. The programs director as well, because you will need programs support in order to tell the stories of legacies and how legacies can help support programs. So that's also a very strong internal ally. And it can also be someone who has the executive director or the CEO's ear. And so sometimes it's not necessarily someone in a high level position or in a management position. It could be, it could be a receptionist or an admin assistant. At an organization I worked at several years ago, the person that had the ED's ear was the institution's secretary, admin assistant, excuse me. She had been there for approximately 40 or 45 years, so she knew the organization in and out. And so the executive director would always turn to her right away for advice, for a different perspective, etc. So I knew that was someone that could really, really be a good ally. Then you also want to look at external allies, such as your board president or the vice president. Of course, they would have the organization's longevity and stability at heart. And so they will definitely have a vested interest in this. And of course, the finance chair, because if you're able to get the director of finance on your side, then the finance chair would be also an obvious choice. It could also be a major donor or a contact at a foundation that your organization has been involved with for many, many years. And if they know a lot about legacy giving and believe in the potential of legacy giving, they could also be someone that could be a strong ally for you, as well as someone with clout, someone in the community that is related to the organization in some fashion. They can also be a great ally to help you advance your legacy plan. So then you want to look, so then you need to start building a case, right? You need to, if you need to get the green light to start a legacy program and get additional funding, then you need to build a business case, okay? And so this is where you need to go from external to internal. So let's look at the external view of what you need to research in order to build your business case. So this is where you create a country or community profile. So let me explain by that. What I mean by that is depending on the kind of organization that you are in. So if you're a small local organization, then you might want to do a community profile based on the city or the community you work in, because if that's the scope of your geographical location, then you would do that. If you're a national organization, you will want to do a country profile. And so, or if you're in a state or in a province, then you want to limit it to that. So basically that's what I mean by a country or community profile. So you want to look at some insights, some data, and you'll have to pull this data from government sources or your community foundation or your professional association, who would basically probably have a lot of this kind of information. So you want to look at the number of the population over the age of 55 in your market. I'm going to use market for the sake of simplicity. So the number of population of over 55, because that's going to give you an idea of the realm of the potential that your organization has within your market. Then you want to break down that number between male and female. Okay. Now, of course, right now, I don't think a lot of governments or institutions have a breakdown of those who are non-binary. And there's not enough research yet in legacy fundraising about, people who, people's behavior if they're non-binary. So I just want to make a quick mention of that. But this would be really interesting because we know that the statistical predispositions for legacies is usually highly educated females. So knowing that will help you. You also want to have an average life expectancy. So how long do people live in your market? So is it up until, is the average life expectancy 85 or 95? Because that's important to know, because you know that if in your database you have a lot of donors that are over the age of 75 and the life expectancy in 86, then it gives you a little bit of an idea of how long you can expect the gifts when they'll start realizing. It's not an exact science, obviously, but it's an indicator so that you can do some long-term planning. You want to look at the education level. Like I mentioned before, some of the statistical predispositions is that your typical legacy donor is women who are highly educated. So the higher level of tertiary education, so university degree, the more potential there is for legacy giving. You want to look at also home ownership rates. Of course, legacy giving is based on your assets, not on your actual cash fluidity. So if you have a high home ownership rate in your market, it means that there'll be more of a potential of having these gifts because everything is deemed liquidated at death. And so that's where the legacy gift would come in from. You, as an interesting indicator as well, is the percentage of adult population with a will and how many of them leave a gift in their will. And usually national legacy marketing campaigns will have that kind of data, like Leave a Legacy or Willpower in Canada. In the UK, it's Remember a Charity. In the Australia, it's and New Zealand, it's Include a Charity. So these kinds of marketing campaigns or organizations will have that kind of data for you. And it's an indicator of how normalized gifts and wills are in your market. You also want to look at the percentage of population that have donated in the last 12 years. So that speaks a little bit about the normalization of philanthropy in your market, like the culture of philanthropy within the market. I'm not talking about within the organization, but within the market. The charitable donations as percentage of GDP, that's an additional insight. Of course, if it's too difficult to find this data, I don't want you to waste too much time on that. These are just additional data that gives you a big picture look at the tendency to be philanthropic in your market. But something that would be really, really helpful that I would anticipate your board would be interested in knowing is the number of registered charities and who are your major competitors in your market. So it's important to know, are you competing against hundreds and hundreds of organizations or just a handful of them? And how many of them actually have legacy programs? Because if no one really does have a legacy program and you decide to start one, you'll be, you're basically the first one out there. So it might be a little bit difficult at first, but you'll be forging a new path in your market to about legacy fundraising. Okay. So next, now you've got the big picture. The next thing is you want to go more micro, right? The internal view. So this is when you start looking inwards within the organization. So this is where your donor insights will determine the potential that your organization has for legacy fundraising. So you want to look at the number of monthly donors. So as I was saying earlier when I was talking about busting the myth, is that organizations that have a robust monthly giving program will have much more potential of having a successful legacy program. Because as I said before, legacy fundraising is not based on how much cash fluidity you have, but it's more about connection and commitment to the cause. And who has more connection and commitment to the cause than your monthly donors? So does that mean that if you don't have a monthly giving program, you can't start a legacy program? No, not at all. One does not preclude the other from being successful. However, it's just that if you do have a monthly giving program that is robust and it's doing well, then it just gives you a leg up. So if you're thinking of starting a legacy program and you've been working on your monthly giving program, invest a bit more on your monthly giving program to make it really robust so that when you do start doing your legacies, then you will have a much easier time. You also want to look at the years of donating. So how long people have been giving to your organization, because that again demonstrates commitment and longevity. You want to look at the age of your most committed donors, looking at, obviously people who are over 55 and so on, because that is where you want to start. You're not going to start marketing to legacy fund, you're not going to start marketing legacies to all your donors because there's probably a bunch of people that are too young or they're not quite there yet. So knowing who are the ones that are over the age of 55. And if you have very little resources, then look at those who are over the age of 65 and then work your way down from that point forward. You also want to look at the strength of your mid-level giving program. So we tend to forget about middle giving because we go from monthly donors to major gifts and then legacies. And then there's like this forgotten middle in between that a lot of people struggle with. And again, like mid-level giving donors are oftentimes very similar to monthly donors. They're just very, very committed, but they don't have the cash fluidity to make the big gifts, right? So they could also be a very good prospect for your legacy program. So if you've been trying to figure out how to move people that are in your middle giving program, in your monthly giving program into major gifts, then develop a nice, robust middle giving program. And if you'd like to learn more about how to start a mid-level giving program, shoot me a message and let's talk. You also want to look at your longtime volunteers, like your board members and your past board members. A lot of your program volunteers who have been with you for a very long time, those are also fantastic legacy prospects. So I'm not saying start soliciting them. I'm just saying start identifying them and marking them in your database as in order to demonstrate that you've got a lot of internal potential. Then you also want to look at other donor behavior, like if you engage with your donors to sign petitions or attend events, these are also indicators of commitment to the cause. So you want to look at things like that, right? So that is your internal view. Next, you want to put it all together. You want to write your business case. So you look at writing your project vision. You want to look at writing your rationale, the key deliverables of your legacy program, and a lot of that will be based on your external and internal view of the case, right? You want to write the success criteria. So how will you measure the success during year 1, year 2, year 3, the scope and the phases, and what budget you will need. A lot of things you can do without a budget. Others, you might need a little bit of budget. Like for instance, if you need to add, do some tweaking to your database in order to track the prospects, then that's a cost. If you need to add a legacy page on your website, that might require some cost. But developing marketing materials, you can use your current marketing materials and just add some legacy messaging in there. So then that doesn't require cost. So it's about doing it in phases. And so you'll be able to then build your case accordingly. So then after you put your case together, this is when you can submit this to your board, and hopefully you will have done such an amazing job, and I'm sure you will, that they will give you a green light and do it. But the importance in all of this is that you need to have a strong culture of philanthropy, because fundraising can't succeed without a strong culture of philanthropy. So what can you do? So as it relates to legacy fundraising, there's a lot of things you can be doing, but I've summarized it in 3 different ways. First and foremost, share donor stories. So this is all about managing up, managing down, managing sideways, okay? So you want to inspire your colleagues, senior management, your board, by sharing stories of your donors as to why they decided to leave a gift in their will. Now, I realize that right now you're probably thinking about, we haven't started a legacy program. So come up with donor stories that you can have conversations with donors who have been giving to you for a long time. Share those stories and then relate it to how much potential, how much money you're probably leaving on the table because you're not engaging with those particular donors to leave a gift in their will. You also want to debunk the myths. So the myths that I identified at the beginning of the webinar, use them. You can, quote me on this. Leisha said, this is what, these are some of the myths, and this is how we debunk them. This is how we smash the myths. We need to take the focus away from death. Legacy fundraising is not morbid. It is absolutely beautiful. So by taking the focus away from death and talking about the values that are shared is what will change all of that mindset. And then make it part of everything. So present a long-term vision from the moment you acquire donors up until the end. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. So look at developing amazing, inspiring, engaging donor journeys from day 1, so that when the donor gets to that point in their life, either through age or life stage, then it won't be a shock, it won't be a surprise when you start talking about legacy fundraising, because they would have heard it throughout their entire journey with your organization. And so that's how you build a strong culture of philanthropy both internally with your colleagues and externally with your donors. So if this has been useful and you want to do more, we can work together. I offer the Online Legacy program, the boot camp, where on a monthly basis, I help you implement your legacy program, and we do this as a group online. And you have me, and you've got other participants, and I bring in special guests, etc. And I give you all the tools and templates and resources you need in order to do this successfully. So you don't need to do this alone. I also offer one-on-one coaching support, help you do an audit of your program or your marketing materials, or even your policies. I also offer consulting and strategy services, doing development audits. I can run your campaigns, your annual, your capital campaign, your endowment campaigns. I can even help you develop programs from scratch. Or I can also, I also offer speaking and training. So whether it be through a tailored, bespoke webinar program or a staff retreat, running your staff retreat or a board retreat, conferences, everything, I can help you in that. So if you want to have more, if you have got questions, if you want to troubleshoot a few things, send me an email. If you want some templates or some resources, shoot me an email at ligia@globetrottingfundraiser.com. You can also visit my website, this is where, if you saw this on YouTube, then you can head over to my website. You can also connect with me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube. On Instagram and YouTube, I have legacy pro tips that I put up every few days. And I'm also offering a free 30-minute coaching session with me. So when you click on the handouts, the PDF of this slide deck, you will have a link to my calendar, so you can book your free 30-minute session. So I hope you found this webinar useful to you, and that it's giving you the tools in order to build your business case. I hope you get the investment you need to launch your legacy program, and that we'll be able to work together at some point. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the success in the world, and be well. Bye.